The Evil Within is a love letter to survival horror games from the mid-90s to early 2000s. In fact, the best way to describe this game is it's a survival horror game from 1998 on the PS1. It just happens to utilize the technical capabilities of gaming hardware from 2014. I enjoy the fact that this is a real survival horror game. Like, you actually run out of ammo. Combat in the game should be avoided. You should be stealthing as much as possible and saving up ammunition, just like any good survival horror game. Over the past 7-8 years, a lot of survival horror games simply forgot this, and they're basically just action-adventure games where you're an unstoppable killing machine with infinite ammo, and there's no survival horror because you're not surviving, you're just massacring the enemies. Now, with the good of classic survival horror games also comes the bad, and that is present in this game. There is a stealth element where you sneak around or sneak up behind enemies and just stab them in the back when a command prompt pops up when you're close enough to the enemy. This way you don't waste any ammo. A lot of times this is fun, but sometimes this is also broken. A lot of times the animation is a bit off and isn't fluid when you perform stealth kills. It kind of takes you out of the game. It reminds you you're in a game, in fact. The enemy is starting to turn around. It sees me or it's about to see me, but if the command prompt to execute is still on screen, the animation reverts back to the enemy being in a different position. It's pretty sloppy programming. Now, the story in the game is oftentimes convoluted and confusing, but honestly, that's okay for a survival horror game. As long as the game's mood is somber, creepy, and sometimes scary, a weird and confusing story can absolutely work for a horror game of this type. I honestly didn't like the game at first, but when I started to compare and contrast it with the classic survival horror games I grew up with on the PlayStation 1, it all started to make sense. The bad parts of the game reverted to just being nostalgic for me. Like I said, it's best not to use the weapons in this game as much as possible, but when you have to use the weapons, it's fun to use them. You have a great selection of weapons, like the crossbow, the gun, the shotgun, a grenade, and you can even use traps in the environment. Like, you can trick an enemy to follow you and have the enemy run into a trap, trigger the trap, and have the trap explode in the enemy's face. This is a game with a few bad aspects, but ultimately, I personally think those aspects are redeemable, and I would absolutely recommend this game to fans of survival horror games. I wouldn't say I'd recommend it to everyone, but if you love games like Silent Hill or the earlier Resident Evils, this game is right up your alley. For people like that, I would say this game is a solid 8.8 out of 10. For everyone else who's not really a fan of survival horror games, I would say it's more of an average game. For you, the score is probably more like 7.3-ish out of 10. Thanks for watching. Goodbye, my friends.